All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're well. Hope you're enjoying the wonderful weather that we have at the moment. I've got to say my flat is getting pretty toasty, so I've got every window possible open. I hope that that isn't affecting how much you can hear. We're back with, I think, episode 5 now of our Holocaust Educational Trust Film Club. And just to reiterate what we're all about, the Holocaust Educational Trust, it's our mission to raise consciousness and educate about the Holocaust wherever we can, right across the UK, in schools, in universities, and in wider communities. Do have a look at our website and get on our Twitter and Facebook if you want to learn more about what we do. So far we've kind of, I was just thinking a few minutes ago about the films that we've addressed and the different aspects of the Holocaust that's brought up. And at the minute where we've covered Schindler's List, The Pianist, we've covered Defiance, and Life is Beautiful. So we've looked at some of the really deep and dark stuff within the Holocaust in Schindler's List and The Pianist. We've looked at sort of a lot of suffering and the Jewish experience through those. We've then looked at the Jewish experience around resistance, or part of the Jewish experience around resistance through Defiance. And then we had a kind of a look at a comedy set in the Holocaust last time, which raised quite a few questions. I'll mention now that I'm thinking that next time round we'll go for Jojo Rabbit, which is also a comedy, and is a very recent one. It's just been put out on DVD and rent to buy and stuff like that on Amazon. So you get your hands on that and have a watch. Hopefully you'll have a bit of a giggle as well and come up with lots of questions, because it certainly does raise some interesting issues. But in today's session, are we calling it a session? I'm not sure what we're calling it. A show? Is it a show? We're looking at a film called The Book Thief, which is based on the book of the same title by Australian author Marcus Zusak. I hope I pronounced his name right. And it's another really interesting film and really interesting story to get involved with. I want to start by kind of pointing out that it's an entirely a work of fiction. And so that brings in a new kind of aspect. I guess last time we were looking at a work of fiction, but something to sort of consider is that this is a fictitious piece of work set in the Holocaust era, set in World War II, or Nazi Germany and into World War II. But it's not trying to represent a story that is a kind of a real life story. So a bit of background maybe to help with that is that Marcus Zusak, his parents are Austrian and German, and they moved to Australia after the Second World War. So they lived through aspects of it, and he said that it was learning from them that informed some of what he wrote about. But I found it quite an interesting film to watch. I must confess I haven't read the book, so if you have, please do chime in if there's extra bits that you can add to the discussion here. But it seems to me like this is a story that isn't about the Holocaust, isn't about World War II as such. That's where it's set. For me, the kind of what he seems to be writing about is about human behavior. It's about a love of literature and words, and kind of the idea of writing and the written word being a representation of life. And that kind of seems to move through the story as much as anything. I've happened upon an interview with him where he was asked about what his motivation for writing the book was, and he kind of said he wanted to write your favorite book. So in that sense, again, it maybe is worth just sort of bearing that in mind, that this was not someone who was on a mission to raise awareness around the Holocaust, World War II, certain experiences or anything. He's right. That's the setting he's chosen. Maybe that's significant as we get into some of the other debates. And I suppose also, so like, we're not going to address questions of accuracy because he's not attempting to be accurate. What we can do is look at specific scenes and say, well, how does that bear representation? What can we derive from that? What learning can we take forward from the representation that he gives? or that the film gives, as it's not the book. So to give a quick synopsis of the film, it's maybe to start with, one of the interesting aspects is that the narrator is deaf, narrating our way through this story. And again, the thought behind that, I believe, was that in World War II, death was entirely present. This was a really good time to be deaf. There was lots of dying. There's lots of that going on, and so why not have that as that voice as the narrator? But the story, narrated by death, follows our main character Liesel, who is an orphaned child. We're kind of led to believe that her mother has either escaped or died due to her relationship with sort of communist resistance to the Nazis, and so she's orphaned into the home of Hans and Rosa Huberman, who are apparently at the start of the film just ordinary, decent German people. Mother particularly strict, and father the sort of soft touch. And I guess the other main character to be aware of, or two main characters, are Rudy, who becomes Liesel's best friend, not least because he fancies her, and then Max, who is a Jewish man who is hidden in the family home of Liesel and her parents. And when we get to that part of the story, we realize that we're looking at a kind of resistance situation, that we're looking at rescue, protection, and all of those things. So as the story moves on, Liesel sort of grows up and joins and kind of has to live this life which she hasn't chosen. She struggles with the lack of relationship that she has with her own mother, and she obviously wants to find her mother. It also becomes apparent early on that she is illiterate, and so she goes through a learning to read process. And again, the sort of written word, her love for literature and words, becomes a really important part of the story. As it moves through, she realizes that so Max turns up following Kristallnacht, the November pogrom, which was November 9th, 1938. And when Max arrives, and she realizes that, okay, they're going to be hiding a person who is at risk, she's beginning to sort of understand what's going on in Nazi Germany gradually, more and more. There's an interesting scene where they're reading the news together, Liesel and Max, and Germany is invaded. I think the headline is about the potential to invade Moscow, and Liesel sees this as, well, we're winning the war, and Max is obviously kind of alluding to the fact that it's not quite so straightforward. So the story moves on. Eventually it becomes quite a tragic story, whereby most of those main characters, with the exception of Liesel and Max, are killed in a bombing raid. And Max, having escaped, returns at the end of the story to be reunited with Liesel, and the final scene of the film is Death narrating the fact that Liesel's led a long life. He describes taking the various family members and friends at the time, but Liesel survives to live into her 90s. So that gives a general sense of what the film is about. And there's a range of themes that I think that this film brings up that we can discuss as useful in terms of sort of Holocaust understanding, education, and maybe broader sort of Nazi Germany. So just the themes that I've kind of noted, and please do add your comments and questions if there's others that you think I've missed. But it raises a question which I think is a really interesting one about life in Nazi Germany, and potentially developing the viewer's empathy with the people that are generally seen in these films as the enemy. The German people were part of the other side. So the fact that this film sort of encourages us to connect with those people, to have sympathy, to want them to live and to survive, and be upset when there's bombing raids, I think that's a challenging thing in itself. There's clearly a theme throughout around bystander behavior and how the German people responded to what was happening around them, particularly when there's a scene where a Jewish shopkeeper is sort of pulled out by the Nazis. A crowd gathers around. Liesel's father, Hans, steps in to sort of vouch for him and is violently brushed aside. But what are the rest of them doing? The question is there. There's another scene where Jews are being marched through the town, and again, the people gather to view what is taking place. I think there was a comment that someone's made, and I apologize, I can't remember exactly who, and I'm scrolling through my notes to find it and I can't, but maybe it's worth just sort of raising the question of how do we as the viewer respond to those bystanders in a scene like that, where and we have plenty of photographic evidence that these scenes were absolutely commonplace. Many camps were built very close to major towns. So, for example, Sachsenhausen, just outside Berlin, half an hour on the train. But as the prisoners would come off the train and walk to the camp, they would walk right through the town of Sachsenhausen. So it raises questions there. How do we respond to seeing this bystander behavior, and what kind of judgments might we make of that? So I guess it's worth thinking about, well, what potentially, we can't know what's going through the heads of those people as they watched, but what kind of discussions, what kind of inner monologue are they dealing with at that time? Are they looking because they support the actions? Are they looking because it's kind of like a car crash scene on the motorway where you can't help but look? They know it's awful, but for some reason they want to be there. Are they watching because they feel like something significant is happening and they want to witness it? Is there even, could there be people that don't understand it? Could there be people that do understand it? In the film, Liesel goes searching for her Jewish friend Max at that point. She has a very clear reaction to it that is highly emotional and gives away all her kind of sense of support for the people and wanting to protect a loved one. So I think just those kinds of scenes really do kind of challenge our thinking on bystander behavior, and I would encourage us to sort of, as we think about this beyond the film and in what we consider to be bystander behavior, to think about, well, what are the circumstances, what are the options in those cases as well? Because we saw in the film that when there was an issue of when Hans did stand up and say, this Jewish person is a good man, there's no reason to be arresting him, he was tossed aside. And we know that in different parts of Europe, that reaction would have been stronger or lesser, depending on who you were, where you were. Certainly in Eastern Europe, just to vouch for Jewish people could be a death sentence for you and your family. The hiding of a Jewish person is certainly incredibly risky no matter where you are. But again, it varied from place to place. So in Poland, getting caught hiding someone was an automatic death sentence. In maybe Holland, hiding someone would have consequences, but maybe not as far as that. So again, that kind of raises one of those difficult and complex issues that we often assume that we can simplify and there be a reductive answer of one size fits all, but the reality was it's a really complex and messy situation across the continent, and the way that Nazis treated different responses to what they were doing depended on where they were across Europe. I think that along with the sort of empathy for those normal Germans that that the film kind of promotes in some way, and again, I'm not sure this is necessarily the objective of the film, but it does, you are naturally saddened. I was chatting to a friend yesterday who's I think joined us now, and he was talking about how there was tears at the end of the film in his family because they were seeing these people perish at the hands of the Allies. So the guys on the wrong side of the war, we were feeling for them. And so I think there's a real theme of humanization that goes on in this, which is a really, I think, one of the real strengths of it, that, when it comes down to it, no matter which side of the war you're on, we're talking about human beings with lives, interests, and all the rest of it. And once you get to know, once you have some empathy with an individual character, regardless of their faith, their religion, their their ethnicity, their nationality, which side of the world war they're even on. We take an interest and we want them to survive, and maybe there's something that we can pick up from that. There's a final thought that I just want to go into before we sort of look at questions, and I'm seeing that there's a couple that are arising, or at least comments, is to think about the concept of resistance. A couple of times ago when we were looking at defiance, we were looking at violent resistance. Last time when we looked at Life is Beautiful, we looked at another kind of resistance, really, which was the resistance of a person who wanted to protect his loved one from the sort of reality of what was taking place. And in this, we're looking at the resistance of hiding someone and keeping that secret and taking that risk. So there's lots and lots of different types of resistance, and this film develops one of them. Okay, I'm going to go to, I can see that Jess Hamilton has made a comment, so thanks, Jess, and she's saying, I think that this opens up potential understanding for people of how life in Germany may have been for young people. The joining of the Hitler Youth, whether they believed it or not, whether they did it because you had to. And it's like, absolutely, the Hitler Youth was a compulsory organization. There was still not 100% take up. I can't remember off the top of my head the statistics, so I won't hazard the figure that's in my brain right now because I might be wrong. But yeah, there was enormous involvement in the Hitler Youth, but it was compulsory. And it was also a very attractive offer. Right? If you've ever seen sort of clips of what kind of stuff they got up to, I imagine that young people would love the idea of doing those sorts of things. Lots of physical activity, lots of engaging, sort of enjoyable things that were community-based, that were supportive of the local communities, all of that kind of stuff, but it's underpinned with the ideology, and that was an equally significant part of it. And I suppose I'd probably dare to suggest that some parts of the film, in that sense, certainly the idea that that Rudy would sort of colour himself to look like Jesse Owens, I find it hard to believe that at his age he wouldn't have understood Nazi ideology and probably have got to a point where he bought into it. We don't see a great deal of active resistance to the ideology in the film, certainly not coming from his family. So perhaps that's one area where a character like Rudy, it's unlikely that he would have held Jesse Owens, even though he's really into his sport and into his sprinting. He may still have, by that point, I would have thought that under the watchful eye of the Nazis and through the Hitler Youth and through the education system, he may not have had such a strong sense of one idolization of that particular character. But that's perhaps a discussion for further thought. I'm going to pick up on Steve's comment here, who says, I think the whole theme of books is fascinating. The value of literature in a progressive society and how this was attacked by Nazi policy. The change in the lead character after she watched the book burning, from going along with the crowd to making a stand. Absolutely, I think that's a really interesting comment, Steve. And I'm looking for a comment from my colleague Annabelle, who also picked up on that theme. And really sort of, I think this is sort of really what the core of the story is about, the power of words. And you've picked up on the that Liesel watches the book burning and actually kind of rescues a book at the end of it. She saves a book, and it kind of I think by this point she's kind of realizing, and through the sort of what she learns from Max, that the written word is life, and so maybe I don't think the film really kind of elaborates on this, but there's something going on where, metaphorically, where she's rescued this book, and it's as if she saved a life there. She saved the life of the legacy of that author, the words in there. She values it, and I think you're absolutely right. Books are a real important theme in this, and as she learns to write, as Max encourages her to use her words and write more, she sees a parallel between mortal life and the written word as something beyond that, and I think that is a really powerful thing. I'm just going to pick up on where are you, Annabelle, on my spreadsheet here? So books and the stories they tell, says Annabelle, arguably become the vessels of life and humanity. Well, so yes, she's talking here, Annabelle, about, one could even argue that there is a hidden message in the proximity of Liesel rescuing the book from the cinders of them to hiding Max. This is, to save a book is to save a life. So maybe, and I really appreciate this question from Annabelle, what can we therefore infer or understand of the power of testimony and the written word as witness? And for those of you who have engaged with the Holocaust Educational Trust materials, we put testimony right at the heart of it. And it is so powerful because it's that is where we kind of get the experience. That's where we get the human aspect of looking at something which is perpetrated in the most inhuman way possible and perpetrated at a scale that is pretty much incomprehensible. So the written word, the testimonies that we have, really bring that life back into the story and give us a much deeper understanding. The power of language around rescue and resistance is also something that kind of really speaks up. So we have Hans speaking up when the Jewish shopkeeper is arrested, Liesel speaking up when the Jewish people are moving through the city and she's not trying to rescue as such, but she is making a statement. She's making a statement of solidarity, albeit with one character, but we can extrapolate out from that. And then there's also the power of not speaking, the power of not using language, in that there's this secrecy throughout the film. Secrecy of, for Liesel, I feel there's a certain secrecy about her past. There's a definite secrecy about hiding Max, and kind of the different forms of resistance that they offer. So speaking as a form of resistance, but also not speaking as a form of resistance. And I think that, to build on the discussions we've had around resistance, this film offers something new and interesting that works really well to complement that. I noticed a conversation that was happening on Facebook that Alison Hume, hi Alison, Ashley Freeman, Lisa Richardson were having about kind of the nature of the film as a useful tool for developing understanding about the Holocaust. And I think and one of the comments that came up was that we can't watch a single film. I think this was so both Lisa Richardson, who says that I don't know one movie can ever give an all-round understanding, but plenty of good ones exist, and sort of mix them together. And Alison responded to that to say that for it to be a part of a rounded Holocaust education, this film has a use. So just to sort of back up onto that discussion a little, and maybe kind of speak into how we can use a film like this in a Holocaust education setting, is to say that our core principles state that we need to root Holocaust education in solid historical understanding, and films don't have that purview. We're not expecting them to do that, certainly not one like this, which is clearly a work of fiction. But what they can do is supplement that and build on that understanding. So from a core historical position, we can use these films to pull out these themes, to develop our empathetic understanding, to look into certain aspects in more detail. So of course a film like this is not going to be a kind of core part of a Holocaust education curriculum, but what they can do is feed into some of the thinking. And again, reflecting on a conversation I had with Steve, the value of a film like this in maybe an English class, where you can look at all sorts of the literary things going on with it, whether it's the film or the book or both, all of those kind of themes, but then explore some of the context elements as well, and see how the language of the film and the book and the context of the film and sort of reflecting on all of those things. I think there's some real value in that. Okay, I'm going to try and find one of the other comments to just to discuss. So another couple of comments that have arisen can question sort of how far it's an accurate portrayal of what life in Germany looked like, and the question mark of whether in a small town setting there would have been more or less support for the Nazis. You know, we saw the scenes on Hitler's birthday when they have the book burning and the flags are everywhere. You know, the train station flags on the front of the train, you see the swastika. And I do think that the film has been trying to portray something relatively realistic in that. I'm not going to say sort of, I've already said it's always complex. It's never the same in two places. So I'm not going to go and say that there was, you know, greater support in the towns than in the cities or in rural areas than in urban areas. But what I do think the film does is give us a bit of an insight, and whether or not it's entirely accurate in terms of the exact setting, what we are seeing is the absolute kind of omnipresence of Nazism and the ideology. And everyone in the film at some stage or another gets that, and knows that there are times when you keep your mouth shut, knows when there are times when you can speak freely. You know, the scene where Liesel and Rudy go to the lake, Rudy's planning on running away, and that's the place where they can say, I hate Hitler. They know there's no one around. So regardless of anything else in terms of what we can ascertain about life in Germany in a town or a city or a village or anything else, I think it does accurately remind us that to speak against the Führer was something you did in only the rarest of circumstances, when you had absolute privacy to do so. The phrase that I don't know the German, or don't remember the German translation, but was "speak through a flower" that Germans used. So in public, it was to say only good things about the state, only good things about the Nazis, only good things about the Führer, and only good things about life, because the risk of someone overhearing and feeling like this is something they want to tip off the Gestapo on and could get you in trouble. That we saw in the film again, that when Hans stands up to the SS, he knows, he kind of feels like he's blown it. He feels like, right, we're in big trouble now. They've taken my name. They will see me as a potential problem, and that was kind of it for him. The kind of response was that he got drafted into the army, and amazingly did survive that element of his life. But for the benefit of the story, I guess. But so there was a clear sort of cause-consequence situation there. Okay, is it worth picking up on? We haven't really talked much in this session on the film in general about the specifics of the Jewish experience of resistance, rescue, hiding, and so maybe just while we've got a couple of minutes left, it's worth picking up on that, because again, I think this sort of points to the fact that the author is not writing a story to be a Holocaust story as such, but this story of Max, who leaves his mother on the night of the November pogrom, Kristallnacht, and finds sort of refuge with the Hubermans, and they're sticking to their word by taking care of him for as long as they can. But his situation is one of utter desperation. You know, he arrives malnourished, cold, and needing bringing back to health. He has to survive in a basement for years and years, and in that period sort of gets to death's door again. Then he has to run away with nowhere to go. And miraculously, he kind of turns up at the end of the film as the sort of one supporting character who has survived. So I think that is an interesting sort of thing to just be aware of. I don't think the film isn't making that a pivotal part of the story. He's an important character, but the main character is Liesel and her experience. But just the fact that is there does really kind of raise some challenge. I'm noticing Alison's saying Max is more of a background character. Resistance, I think, is a background theme in the stories about Liesel. I would broadly speaking agree with that. Melissa Sykes, hello to you, says, I think Liesel also shows that humanity persisted throughout the Holocaust. It's easy to lose that when studying it, obviously, but their friendship reminds us of the ordinary people. And I think that's a really important point to make, Melissa, that again, it's about individuals, and we can make broad brush comments, but when we watch a film like this and find ourselves sympathizing with an individual German person, then that challenges us to question some of those broad brush comments that we might have made in the past, and some of those perceptions that we might have had. Again, the difficulty with learning this in the classroom is that you often don't have a great deal of time, so we can find ourselves accidentally and unintentionally falling into the traps of generalization. So to see a character like this, albeit a fictional one, but we know that these kinds of people existed all across Europe, that showed humanity in the face of what was happening. I think that's a powerful thing. Alison Hume agrees. She says, good point. Liesel is a very likable character, so we want to follow her growth and her friendship, particularly with Rudy and Max. Absolutely. And so I guess maybe a point to leave it on is the value of humanization, the value of getting inside the head of someone who we're maybe uncomfortable with investigating, with getting to know, but finding that there's humanity there, and we have more in common than we don't, even with the nastiest characters in these stories. And perhaps that's something that we'll follow up on in a later discussion. It's 5:30, so I'm going to leave you to go and find a park to socially distance yourselves from others, but enjoy the evening. Just to remind you, we're sticking with sort of family-themed films for next time. So Jojo Rabbit is the one to go and look up. I do think it's not on a freebie just yet, so apologies for that. We're trying our best to find the films that you can access as easily as possible. It is easy to access, but it does come at a price of a few quid. But I would argue that in this case, I've seen the film. I think it's definitely worth the money. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of comments. So please, over the next 2 weeks, do share your comments, whether they be questions or just thoughts. We really appreciate seeing what you have to say in advance, and it gives me a few ideas to pick up on. So please come forward with those things. Enjoy the next couple of weeks. I was also thinking today about the fact that every time we've done this, the weather has been glorious. So thank goodness for that. Aren't we lucky that we have this weather to enjoy? At least if we can't go and do all the social things we like, then at least we get to enjoy the sunshine. So I bid you farewell. Enjoy the sunshine this weekend. Enjoy your bank holiday, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks, guys. Take care all. Bye bye.